Knitting socks is a really enjoyable little facet of knitting in general as a hobby. But when it comes to making socks, there are some specific things that you need to be looking for in your yarn to make sure that the socks that you make don't end up being nothing but holes. In this video, I'm going to be sharing what exactly it is that you need to look out for when selecting the right yarn to knit a pair of socks with. I have knit dozens of pairs of socks, and when I first started making socks, I was very overwhelmed by the choices that were out there. So this video is coming straight off the back of that experience because I have made so many mistakes, and I'll be sharing them with you now so that you don't have to. Welcome to the Crimson Stitchery. My name is Anushka and this is a video channel about making all things beautiful and useful. You can find me elsewhere online as The Crimson Stitchery. We're at thecrimsonstitchery.com. We're on Instagram, and this video is coming to you courtesy of all of my lovely and wonderful supporters over on Patreon who help fund this video channel where I make podcasts and share tutorials and tips just like this video here on a monthly basis thanks to membership subscriptions. So if you enjoy the Crimson Stitchery, our Patreon community is a wonderful place to meet other like-minded people and share your passion and madness for making things. Head over to patreon.com/The Crimson Stitchery to check out all of the various different tier benefits and choose the right one for you. So it is the end of May as I am recording, the perfect time to pick up a summer knitting project, which for me, and I know for many other people, is sock knitting. I love making socks as a summer project. In fact, the pair that I'm holding here, this orange pair, is one of my sock designs. It's the curly whirly socks that I actually designed specifically for warmer weather, both in terms of making the pattern itself and also wearing the finished project. When it comes to my sock patterns, I only ever recommend yarns which I myself have tested out and can thoroughly vouch for. And sometimes that testing out process actually takes the period of several years. It's really my favorites. And so in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you how exactly to approach choosing a sock yarn. Now, when it comes to sock yarn, the market for it is so vast. And something that I think is really important to bear in mind is that certain yarns that are called sock yarn or might have the word sock in their name or in their branding might not actually necessarily be the best choice. And the reasons for that is because they may or may not fit the technical characteristics that I would be looking for in a sock yarn, which is what I'm going to guide you through in this video. But with thousands of products out there on the market, suitable for absolutely every budget, it's really crucial to know the technical properties of the yarn that are going to serve your purposes. In this case, making and wearing socks that are going to be comfortable, that will fit well, and that will actually wear well, that will hold up to the friction, having your body weight, pressed against them, and the friction of being rubbed against shoes, as well as being suitable and thin enough to wear inside a normal pair of shoes. Because in my mind, there's nothing worse than a knitted finished object which never gets worn and never sees the light of day, right? In my opinion, the best knitting projects are the ones which work so well that we actually manage to integrate them into our everyday life and wear them all the time. And hopefully that will include your hand knitted socks. It certainly has become, for me and my household, we only wear our hand knitted socks these days after several years of building up the collection. So without further ado, I will now outline the key characteristics and properties of suitable yarns for making socks, and I'll explain why they are so important. And after that, I will share where to find out this information. Number one, and the most important factor to take into consideration, is that you must look for a high twist sock yarn. So when it comes to the spin type, it should be high twist with as many plies as possible. So something to note is that in knitting, as with many many other elements of textile crafts in general. Sometimes the same words will be used across different categories. And that certainly comes into play with sock yarn when we're talking about ply, because 4-ply weight yarn is a British term for describing what the American term is fingering weight yarn, which is basically one of the thinner types of yarn, right? So I'll get into yarn weight in a moment, but just staying on ply, you basically want to look for yarns with as many plies as possible. So ideally 4-ply weight yarn will also have 4 plies of actual yarn in the actual spin. And the main thing to think about here is to be wary of singles or single ply yarn, which is literally just one thin strand of yarn. And the reason for that is that when it comes to yarn, basically the more twists that we put into our fibre, the more strength we lend it. And so when we then ply multiple strands and twists of yarn together, maybe as many as 4, sometimes it can even be 8, or, you know, it can be 3-ply or whatever. But, you know, basically as many plies as possible, we create more and more strength. We also lend a little bit of bounce and elasticity within that twist. If you think about the fact that, you know, if I just gathered up a bunch of my hair, you know, that could be single ply, but if I actually bothered to braid it, I would create a plait which really locks all of the fibres together and brings some strength to my hair. And it's exactly the same thing when it comes to the fibres of yarn and wools. So you want to look for yarns with a high twist and really as many plies as possible, hopefully at least 4. Now there are lots of yarns which are only single ply, so single strand of yarn, which might be 4-ply or fingering weight. And they're being sold as sock yarns. And I've seen this in like independently produced hand-dyed artisanal yarns, as well as much more commercial mass-produced yarns. And the reason that single-plied yarns are desirable in this instance is because of the surface texture that they create. It's very fuzzy, it's very soft, and especially when it's dyed in a sort of ombre or a fade or a, you know, striped or a speckled in a fancy way, the way that the colours can play on the surface can be extremely beautiful. Whereas with high twist yarns, things are a little bit more crisp, a little bit more defined. I am speaking in very, very broad terms here, but this is why I believe that there are single ply yarns on the market being sold as sock yarns. And you can use them in your sock projects. They just are not going to be very durable. So I do have a few pairs of socks which are made using single plied sock yarn. However, they have not worn particularly well, they have pilled quite a lot more than the tightly and heavily plied yarns, and they have felted up quite a lot more easily as well, because without all of those extra twists and plies within the strands, you know, it's very much easier for fibres to work their way out of the yarn and out of the fabric and forming pills or felting up together and fulling and becoming a little bit matted. So the first thing to look out for in sock yarns is definitely going for a high twist, as many plies as possible. The second thing to look out for is hard-wearing fibre content. Now, the gross majority of sock yarns that are on the market are going to contain at least 20, if not 25% of polyamide, which is the technical name for nylon. Nylon is a brand name, just so that you are aware. So if you see that a yarn contains 25% polyamide, that is the same as nylon. I would also recommend that the yarn that you choose has a majority fibre content of wool, if you're not allergic, that is. And ideally it would be superwash wool so that it's machine washable. Now, wool is a really fantastic yarn for socks because it is very absorbent, basically. So it can absorb the moisture from your skin and it also wicks it away naturally. Wool is also very nice to knit with because it's very elastic, and it's exactly that elasticity that lends itself very, very well to making socks. So in my opinion, a standard, 75% wool and 25% polyamide high twist sock yarn is really going to be suitable for making socks. It's, an oldie but a goodie. When it comes to the wool itself, I would always go for a hard-wearing fibre breed if possible. Now, a lot of the time, the type of wool that is used in commercial yarns is not specified. It's just called wool because it's a blend of mixed fibres. But occasionally you do have specified breeds. And when there is an option, I will always go for blue-faced Leicester. The reason for that is that the staples of the blue-faced Leicester wool, so the individual hairs, they have a very, very long length, which again gives it a lot more strength when it's plied together into a yarn. I personally would avoid more luxurious fibres like merino and even things like cashmere. And the reason for that is because those fibres are prized for their softness and not for how hard wearing they are. So when it comes to socks, you want it really to be very, very durable. Now, there are so many yarns on the market that are being sold as sock yarns. And when I was at the beginning of my sock knitting career, I was convinced that, you know, despite the fact that my mind told me that I really should look for something more hard wearing, just by light of the fact that, you know, other people and companies were saying it was suitable for socks, that would make it okay. And personally, I have had very bad luck with 100% merino wool sock yarn, superwash merino that is. They've just worn away, really just worn into holes like straight away. And yes, maybe that's partly to do with my gait, you know, the way that I walk around. Maybe it's to do with the fact that I have got hard floors, you know, we don't have carpets and things like that in the house. Or it could be because my shoes are very tight and, you know, there's a lot of friction and that's rubbing away on the sock. And, you know, that all of that is possible, but at the same time, you've got to take into account your actual lifestyle. And I do not want to be spending all of my precious free time knitting socks only for them to turn into holes. I have heard of people having no problem with 100% merino socks, and if that's you, good for you. You're clearly much more light-footed than me. I also wonder personally if 100% merino socks, you know, are people that have success with them, are they going out and wearing them all day, every day? You know, are you wearing them to work? Are you on your feet quite a lot? Or are you just wearing them as bed socks? Are you just wearing them in slippers at home, you know, all in soft surfaces? There are lots of variables that come into play, but when it comes to sock yarns, just keep thinking durable, 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 and go to the strongest and hardest wearing fibres that you can. Now, I mentioned the word superwash. I would personally go for a superwash wool because I just don't have the time to hand wash my socks. And you might be different. If so, good for you. But I am not that person. And also there is the issue about microplastics pollution when it comes to the polyamide. I personally have a special laundry bag which has a filter on it which prevents microplastics from escaping into the water system. So I use that to wash my socks in, and I just machine wash them on a delicate setting all in one go, and that's totally fine. So when it comes to fibre content, as hard wearing as possible, possibly wool. Do not have a huge amount of experience of sock yarns which are entirely plant-based. So if you do, and you know, if you have a recommendation in that sense, please do drop a comment down below and let me know and let our viewers know, because I'm sure that everybody is really interested to find out. And another note about nylon is that I've noticed that there have been a lot of developments in the textile industry about creating biodegradable plastics and things like that. So I personally am following along with great interest about how those new fibres and, you know, obviously more sustainable fibres that are much less harmful to the environment are being integrated into more commercially available products. I think that there's been huge developments in the last few years, so I am just eager for more of that to become available on the domestic market. So again, if you know about like more sustainable, you know, plastic superwash treatments or, you know, sustainable alternatives to nylon, do drop them in the comments below, especially if you have road tested a sock sample, you know, if you've really worn a pair of like nylon alternative socks quite a lot and can really, you know, do a side-by-side comparison. I would be so interested to hear about that. Yarn recommendations down below, please, if you will. Moving on to the yarn weight, I would go for a 4-ply weight, also known as fingering weight yarn. And on my website, thecrimsonstitchery.com, I do have a yarn weight chart, which is a reference guide for the difference in terminology between British English and American knitting terms. So do head over and check that out if you ever wonder what people are talking about when it comes to different yarn weights. 4-ply weight yarn or fingering weight yarn is definitely on the thinner end of the spectrum. It's like the second most thin yarn after lace weight yarn. And when I was first learning how to knit socks, I found this quite intimidating because I had never used such thin yarn prior to that. However, the thing to note about hand knitted socks is that they are much thicker than the cotton blend kind of socks that you would get in high street fashion stores. They are much thicker. They are closer to hiking socks or even ski socks. You know, they are really, really thick. So even a 4-ply or fingering weight pair of socks is going to be fairly thick. You can get sock yarns that, you know, are high twist, have a nylon content, are superwash wool and so on, which are in heavier weights as well. Most commonly I've seen DK, double knitting weight sock yarns, although personally I find that a little bit too thick and more suitable for socks that I just wear around the house, or maybe bed socks. I have found a great compromise in sport weight sock yarn, which is in between 4-ply fingering weight and the DK weight. It's just that little bit heavier than 4-ply, which makes the project come along just that little bit quicker, but it doesn't make the finished sock be too thick. So I can still wear it in my boots and in my looser fitting shoes. You know, I wouldn't wear hand knitted socks with high heels because that's too tightly fitted to the foot, but loosely fitting shoes, it's absolutely fine for. And I've really enjoyed creating simple and satisfying sock designs using sport and fingering weight yarn as well. So do check out my sock designs for the Crimson Stitchery in my Ravelry shop, also available on Payhip. I'll put a link down below. The final thing to think about, and the most exciting when it comes to buying yarns, in my opinion, after the fibre content, is the colour and the dyeing style. Wow, now this is really where sock yarn comes into its own. It's like there is something for everyone, and there is something for every person that you ever dreamed that you could even be. You know, when it comes to sock yarn, like the storytelling, the photography, the experimentation, the dyeing is so exciting, and definitely one of the reasons that, you know, was a little hook for me to get into sock knitting, because I just wanted to see what all of the fuss was about and why people loved it so much. And a big part of that is the use of colour. When it comes to choosing the finished look of the yarn that you go for, even after you've narrowed it down to the twist, to the fibre content and to the weight, I would advise that you think about the final sock pattern that you are planning on knitting. And as a general rule of thumb, if you are knitting an elaborate and complicated pattern, whether that involves lace, maybe cables, or some kind of other fancy textured stitch pattern, then I would go for a really plain sock yarn. Maybe it's a hand-dyed tonal or semi-solid, maybe it's got a little bit of tweed or like a few dyed speckles, or it could just be completely plain, you know, just like plain block dyed, like commercially dyed and very simple. But if the pattern is complicated, go for a simple dye process, and then flip that around. If you are knitting a simple sock pattern, such as a basic stocking stitch sock, also known as a vanilla sock, or maybe a rib, especially if it's a wide rib, or just, you know, something with like a basic texture, you know, like my red brick socks, for example, spring to mind, then go to town on the craziest yarns that you can find. Go for these heavily speckled, the self-striping, the crazy pooling, the beautiful fades, like just anything your heart desires, but keep the pattern, the sock pattern, simple. And the reason for that is simply to do with the surface texture. You've got to think about what you want to call attention to. Do you want to make a big deal about what a fancy knitter you are and how you just love to knit lace and crazy textures? I've got to say I'm in that camp fully. Then just go for the simpler yarns. Or do crazy yarns just make your heart sing? In which case, do yourself a favour and just make a simple sock and enjoy the process of knitting up those wild, colourful yarns. Just enjoy that process. Because to my mind, it's just no point putting loads of effort into doing a complicated stitch pattern only to have it be usurped by the madness and glory of the dyer and the dyeing skills and techniques. Always about finding the balance between simplicity and snazziness. That is basically what to look out for when you choose a yarn. Think about the twist, think about the fibre content, think about the yarn weight, and make a careful and considered choice when it comes to the colour and the dyeing method, or just leap in with your instinct when it comes to the colour and dyeing method, in which case pick a simpler pattern and just, you know, save yourself a headache. As to where you can find all of this information, well, a really good place to start is simply by looking at a product description and the technical description of the yarn, which you should find on the ball band. So I'm not even talking about what the yarn is called, the name of its range, or the name of its colorway. I'm really talking about the very basic information that you'll find if you flip the ball band around and look at the gauge suggestions, the needle suggestions, the fibre content. After that, have a look at the yarn itself. You'll be able to spot if it's a single ply or if it's got many plies. If you are in person, maybe you can try and just, you know, feel the actual strand of yarn, or if you're looking at it online, you can zoom into the picture, hopefully. If there is absolutely no information available on the retailer's website, this is when you can start to do an internet search and try and find broader background information. So you could look up the company that the yarn is made by. Generally, they have, you know, quite helpful websites with a kind of catalogue of their latest styles and more information about the production. You can go onto database websites like YarnSub, and you can go on Ravelry if you're a member. It's free to join, and look up more information about the yarn there. And if you really want to dig deep, you know, you can go into the forums and ask people and all of that. Or you could ask another knitter for a recommendation, whether that's someone in a local knitting group to you or perhaps online. As I mentioned at the top, we do have a lovely, lovely, friendly group over on our Discord server of the Crimson Stitchery, which you can access via Patreon, just as an example. But you can also make knitty friends here on YouTube in the comments and on places like Instagram and Reddit, you know, online communities where knitters will gather. So as I said, when it comes to purchasing the yarn that you're going to be using for socks, you do need to be a little bit savvy, especially at the beginning. You need to be able to analyze the type of yarn that you are looking at, whether that's browsing it online, in a web shop, maybe doing a little bit of extra research online, or indeed if you are walking into a local yarn shop or a department store perhaps. It's always good to be armed with a little bit of knowledge and to prepare yourself adequately to make the right choice. It's really not that difficult. It's not a lot of things to look out for, you know, so please don't feel intimidated. Just, you know, fortify yourself with this knowledge. And what I would say is really hold true to the knowledge critically. And the reason that I say that is because there is a lot of misleading information out there. There can be a lot of misleading information out there, especially when it comes to marketing. And I myself have been prey to misinformation. I myself have made the mistake of thinking, oh, well, you know, this yarn is called sock yarn, so it must be absolutely fine for a pair of socks, even though it is made from 100% alpaca, for example, or whatever it is, you know. There's something about that kind of authoritative voice of, you know, a piece of branding or product description that can make you kind of second guess your own knowledge and instincts. So I'm here to encourage you to continue to build up your own knowledge base when it comes to textiles, fibres, knitting, yarn and making and crafts in general, and then really hold true to your own knowledge whilst being willing to experiment and learn accordingly, you know, and learn from your mistakes. And if you're interested in hearing more about my top 10 yarns for making socks, do hit the subscribe button down below and look out for another video where I'll be sharing my top 10 yarns. Let me know how far along you are into your sock knitting journey, or if you're just starting, let me know how you get on. And if you've got some extra tips about what to look out for when choosing a sock yarn, or if you've got some recommendations of specific yarns, please do drop me a comment down below here on YouTube and share it with me and the community, because I know that everyone will love to know the yarns that you are enjoying too, so that they can check them out as well. Another huge thanks to all of my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to get involved with the Crimson Stitchery's community, head over to patreon.com/thecrimsonstitchery to find out more. Thanks so much for watching, happy knitting, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!